Hello and welcome back to the Professional Insights series. I am here this evening with two Shep alumni who are pursuing careers in nursing and midwifery. I'm excited to chat with them about their paths and their Shep experiences. So without further ado, I would like to know from both of you your names, where you're from, what you studied at your undergraduate institution, and where you went to school for undergrad. So Nancy, I'll start with you.
Hi, my name is Nancy Reinhart. I'm originally from Kentucky, from Louisville, Kentucky. I was a major in political science and mass communications, and I went to W&L.
And then I'm Alexandra Pearson. I graduated in May from W&L as well, where I majored in cognitive and behavioral science, and I am originally from Houston, Texas.
Thank you so much. And I am Danielle Quat. I am Shep's Alumni Engagement Specialist and a Shep alum from the class of 2011, also a Washington and Lee grad. So Nancy and Alexandra, I'd like to know why you wanted to do a Shep internship. And if you could tell us a little bit about it, like when it was, where your placement was, and your biggest takeaway, that would be great. Alexandra, let's start with you this time.
Sure. So I really looked into the Shep internship because I had grown up doing a lot of service and mission work, and I knew at the core of both my academic career and my career outside of school that I wanted service and others to be really the center of it all. So that's kind of how I got started with the Shepherd program, and I ended up doing, funny, Nancy, you mentioned Louisville. That's where I did my Shep internship in the summer of 2019 at an organization called Family Scholar House, which was where it was a organization that was educational based. So it was allowing individuals into the program that were interested in pursuing a higher education, whether that was their GED, high school diploma, or anything above that. And so what the program really did was kind of manage their educational status as well as provide housing if that was something that they needed as well, and kind of work through all the different problems and challenges that they're also single mothers face while hoping to pursue education.
Thank you, Alexandra. Did you share your biggest takeaway? Did you have a biggest takeaway?
I think one of my biggest takeaways from that experience was I spent a lot of time doing intake surveys and answering phones and doing a lot of the small things at nonprofits that I think isn't as glamorized or doesn't feel as important necessarily because, you know, you're not always directly working with clients or solving these big issues that I've always been super passionate about. And I think my biggest takeaway in doing that was that that is valuable work too. And you know, someone needs to be answering the phones and being the first point of communication when someone's in a challenging situation and super vulnerable. You know, they need a kind voice and a, you know, empathetic way of speaking and dealing with and hearing some of the situations that they're going through in order for them to proceed with a nonprofit or an organization in some senses.
I really appreciate that. As a social worker now, that resonates loudly with me. So thank you for sharing that perspective. How about you, Nancy?
So in terms of why I wanted to do an internship, Professor Harlan Beckley, who I think has since retired, approached me about it because he knew of the Frontier Nursing Service, which is where I ultimately ended up serving. And it was in Eastern Kentucky. He knew I was from Kentucky. He knew I had an interest in the health field, and he thought it would be a good match. So he encouraged me to apply. I had been in a couple of his classes, and so I enthusiastically did so. And I did end up serving at the Frontier Nursing Service. It was in the summer of 1998, so after my junior year in college, and I lived in Leslie County in Hayden. The Frontier Nursing Service is a rural health service that served all over the area. It was the birthplace of modern, what we think of as modern nurse midwifery. I won't say it was the birth of midwifery in the country, but modern sort of nurse midwifery that was master's educated type of track. And My role was to be a courier, which is a program that is still ongoing now, to do a bunch of administrative stuff, as well as help the nurse midwives who were there and do actually volunteering in the hospital. So my biggest takeaways, number one, are that I gained a great respect for the strength and resilience of people in Eastern Kentucky and the wisdom and the open-heartedness that they brought to me. Another thing I would say is that I fell in love with midwifery. I didn't walk away from there convinced that I was going to go back to school, but ultimately ended up doing so. And my inspiration and passion for midwifery started there. And then I would say the third thing would be that it became really clear to me through that experience what the power dynamics are when we go into service roles and we think that we're going in to help someone else. And in fact, a lot of what we often find is that we ourselves are helped. And that was certainly the case for me in terms of the things that I learned and what I walked away with, as a changed person from the people that I met and interacted with. So I think that's really true across the board. If we unpack some of the power dynamics of service, it's definitely a two-way street. And I think it's important to look at it that way.
Absolutely, Nancy. I appreciate that perspective too. And it sounds like Dr. Beckley was right when he identified that as a potentially transformative placement for you. So that's terrific. He was also my advisor when I was at Washington and Lee. And you're right, he is now retired and living in Lexington. So the third question has to do with what you did after you earned your undergraduate degree. And I'm also going to pose the follow-up question because I think it's probably connected, which is what influenced your decision to pursue a career in health or healthcare, nursing, midwifery, however you would choose to characterize it. So Alexandra, I'll start again with you because you're our recent graduate on the call.
Sure. So I just graduated in May, and prior to graduating, I was really unsure what I wanted to do. I always knew that I was going to have to back to school, and whether that was going to be this year or in a couple of years, I was trying to find out how I was going to fill the gap until I was going to go back to school. So I was just kind of all over the place, not knowing whether school again meant my master's or my PhD, since I was a cognitive and behavioral science student. But ultimately, I really always had a love for healthcare. I initially thought that I wanted to go to med school. And as time kind of went on, I figured that I was really more interested in the patient and sort of developing a patient and provider relationship. And so I knew that I wanted to incorporate that somehow into my profession. And really, I never thought about nursing until the end of my senior year, or I guess it was the beginning of my senior year. So in about October. And when someone mentioned to me, I was kind of like, okay, wow, that's the first thing that I've heard that I feel like incorporates, my love for science, but also my innate, I'm innately very drawn to people. And I think that nursing, from what I've heard so far, I'm still in school, just started, is very person and patient centered. And so that's kind of what I've ultimately always really cared about. And I think that nursing was kind of a really perfect marriage of all of those different things for me. And so I ended up applying throughout my senior year, took some classes during spring term and over the summer, and got into the school that I'm currently at, which is Northeastern University, in July. And I began in September, and I'm still going strong so far.
Thank you. One follow-up question to that. So given that you have an undergraduate degree already in cognitive science, how long will it take you to finish the BSN program?
Sure. So the program I'm in now, and I know that there's many others that are out there, is called an accelerated BSN. So an accelerated Bachelor's of Science in Nursing. So essentially what that means is I started in May. I'll go through December for semester 1, and then semester 2 will be January to May of 2022. I'll go through the summer, which will be semester 3, and then I'll graduate in December in semester 4 and receive my Bachelor's of Science in Nursing. So it's really an accelerated program, and only is about a year and a half.
Gotcha. That's great. Thank you. Nancy, what about you?
Yeah, so after I finished, I joined the Peace Corps as a health volunteer. So I served in the country of Armenia for about 2.5 years abroad, and met who later became my husband there. And really just had a phenomenal experience, and again, learning so much from the Armenian people, who are just really wonderfully hospitable, open-hearted people who have so much depth and history to them. So that was a really great experience that is kind of beyond the scope of this call or this program, but certainly was put onto that path and motivated by realizing in the Shepherd program I really wanted to be more in health. And my decision to be in political science, my undergraduate degree being in political science as my primary major, was motivated by my love for policy and my recognition that policy is so important in any field that we want to see major changes in. So I continued to work in policy and public health, got a master's in public health when I got home from the Peace Corps. And that's what I did for essentially the rest of my 20s into my early 30s, was work in public health. And still have a love and a passion and bring public health into my work all the time. And gradually through those various positions that I did some social justice organizing back in Eastern Kentucky. I just really still felt the calling of midwifery, and I still really felt strongly about the voice of a provider, even when we were working on policy issues as they pertain to public health and sustainable types of energy and different things. It just always felt like healthcare providers had such a powerful voice and a role in that policy debate. So I just still felt that, and I felt how they tied together even more. So my partner and I had a conversation and just really said, are we going to take this on? It's kind of still here. It's still present for me, and ended up in my 30s going back to school and taking that long journey back to school while I was working and having kids, and ended up with a degree in midwifery. So that was kind of the short version of what I did after I graduated and went on to do other things before I became midwife.
That is super exciting. We have had a panel about public service opportunities like the Peace Corps, AmeriCorps, City Year, and others, which was a beautiful conversation because people had such exciting and memorable experiences. So thank you for also introducing that element of your story into this conversation. Alexandra, I know that you have limited time with us this evening, so I'm going to pose this as sort of a final question to you. And then Nancy, if you can hang with me for a few more minutes, I have a couple of questions about career path and what brings you the most joy in your work now. So Alexandra, at this point, I'm wondering if there are any words of advice that you would give to Shep students or alums who are thinking about pursuing a career in nursing.
I think some advice I would give, at least for nursing, I would just say to keep an open mind. I think that initially, especially going through the process of being a W&L grad, and there is, of course, so many options for career paths, graduating as a cognitive and behavioral science major or whatever major you graduate with at a liberal arts college. And I think at first my mind was really closed off to nursing for some reason because it wasn't always posed as maybe medical school or a PhD or something else. But I think that it is a really, really great match for so many people that are interested in caring for people with their profession. And obviously that can be done in so many different ways. But I would just say to keep an open mind and continue to ask questions and get to know people that are in the profession and see if it might be something that you want to do, because the options are limitless. And whether it's going and getting your BSN like I'm doing, or maybe it's going to a different program and eventually coming a nurse practitioner or something else. I just think that there are so many options. And of course, hopefully my email is out there, but if anybody ever has any questions, I know it can be a hard process to navigate sometimes. So I'm happy to help anyone out or ever chat with you if you need it. But I hope some of what I said was helpful this evening, or at least gave you some sort of insight or maybe resonated with some of you all. But thank you for having me here, and I hope that it was helpful.
You did terrific. Thank you so much, Alexandra, for your time and your insight this evening. I think you shared some really inspirational comments with the group, and I look forward to connecting you to any alums who are also interested in pursuing this career path. So have a nice evening and stay in touch. We're here when you need us. Thank you.
Thank you. Y'all too.
See ya.
Bye.
All right, Nancy, it's just you and me now.
Yep.
I have a couple of questions about the work that you're doing.
Sure.
The first one is broad in the sense that I just like to know what you find the most rewarding, and maybe you can tell us a story.
Yeah, so what I'm doing is I'm now a nurse midwife, and I also still use my public health in certain ways in my job, which I can explain more if you want me to. But I got a job in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. I wanted to continue work in kind of a small rural area, and stay in the general area in the country. So that's what we did, and we're happy. I work with a company called WellSpan, and I'm a full scope nurse midwife, meaning I do both office and hospital, do both birth OBGYN care, so both gynecological and obstetric care, and work with a team of 4 doctors and 4 nurse midwives. And so you asked me the question about what I find most rewarding. Was that generally?
Yeah, that's a good way of phrasing it.
Okay. So in my actual work, I would say that the process of midwifery care is what I find the most rewarding, particularly, hopefully, when it goes well. And what I mean by that is, so sometimes, someone comes in for a birth and they might have an idea of the way it's going to go. And anybody who knows much about birth knows that most of the time it doesn't go the way you want it to. Something will be different. Maybe many things will be different. Birth is something that if we allow it to unfold, we can't have control over it. We actually kind of have to surrender control to some degree. And kiddos have their own things going on. So sometimes babies, have their own agendas. They have their own health issues that we don't expect or anticipate, or sometimes we do anticipate, and they mean the choices that someone wanted can't be possible. So what my goal as a midwife is not to give them the birth that they want, but instead to allow the process to hopefully be one where they feel included and empowered, and that our decision-making can be a shared one, so that essentially people feel like they understand the risks and benefits of choices along the way. They know if I have a recommendation that I'll offer it. They feel trust and confidence that I'll tell them the truth, and that they feel like they are an important part of the decision, and it's not just something happening to them. And I think that ultimately helps them become better parents and also feel not always good, but at least participatory in the healthcare process, and sometimes good. So, it's not so much the outcome. Of course, wonderful births that are, happy and fantastic are great, but not everybody gets those. And so sometimes the births are difficult. Sometimes they don't turn out the way people want them and they end up in a C-section. But my most rewarding experience is when I can build intimacy and trust with families and feel like on the other side of it, regardless of what the outcome was, the process was something that they felt included in and empowered by, and really a very central part of.
Very well said. I can tell that you have a lot of experience and that you've thought about your role extensively, from a lot of different angles. So that's exciting to hear. A follow-up question to what you mentioned about still using kind of your public health lens and background in the work you're doing now. How does that play out in your day-to-day or in the broader scope of your professional and civic engagement?
Well, so there's a few ways. So the first is sort of outside of work. I've had a very challenging personal year for a variety of reasons. My father died in January, and then I had a brother get very sick from COVID and had some other challenging things. So it's been a difficult year, but as in a general way, I do stay very involved with our American College of Nurse Midwives and the local chapter of that. And so they are the main policy making, advocacy body for nurse midwives and for really for women. I mean, at the end of the day. So that's a kind of an outside of work thing that I'm involved with and continue to stay involved with. And then I would say that inside of work, there's both the day-to-day and the broader. The broader is that I'm always, happy to help and volunteering with things like making videos about the COVID vaccine and the pros and cons of that, doing Q&As if there's a need for that, being involved in panels, so different ways in which I can sort of connect my day-to-day work with the public health background that I bring and what I've seen in communities and ways in which I think a provider voice may be helpful. And then on the day-to-day work, I would say it definitely is a huge piece of how I approach conversations with people, because I've learned very, very hard ways a long time ago that any solution that doesn't involve the limitations of someone's life and their own ideas about what is the most helpful is a futile solution. So in other words, people are usually best at knowing what's realistic and what they can sort of make happen in their own life. So I try to make conversations revolve around that as the center. A patient-centered conversation looks like, hey, here's what we would love. Why don't you tell me what's realistic? Or, hey, this is kind of the end goal. What are your thoughts about that? And I can be pretty like open-hearted and open-minded about people's perspectives. So for example, the COVID vaccine is a super, super polarizing topic right now. And, I myself personally am vaccinated, but I have to have conversations almost every day that I work with people about what their thoughts are. And I get across the spectrum a whole lot of different responses. And I try to be really clear with them about where I'm coming from, but also to say, I respect your opinion, and what you're telling me. The more open-hearted you can be, the more we're going to have a good conversation. If I try to push and attack, it's just going to make those walls go up. So I'm just really aware of that. And I think the only way you change hearts and minds is to build that sense of trust and for them to know with some transparency kind of where I'm coming from. So I do make my recommendations. I definitely recommend people get it. But I also say, you know what, we're going to have this conversation. I'm going to tell you my opinion. You can tell me yours. Let's have a good talk, because otherwise, how are we going to move forward? And I feel like that comes from my public health experience. And I feel like I have good conversations as a result of, like I said, learning the hard way sometimes, right? I've not always been like this. And yeah, I was listening to Alexandra talk, and I was thinking, some of the things I always tell people, and it's the truth. I just don't think I would have been a great nurse in my 20s. I think life experience has made me a better healthcare provider. And I don't think, I admire the people who can do it when they're younger, but I think that, I'm glad that my path was a little bit twisted, because I feel like my patients are better for it, and I'm better for it.
Can relate. And I can also hear elements of a liberal arts education in the way that you talk about the work that you do. Like, you're approaching the patients and the societal environments in which they exist and the times through so many different lenses. And that's how we are all operating, right? Like, we're not approaching any given situation through exactly the same lens. And so just having that recognition from the get-go that, hey, like, we're here for a common goal, but the way that you think we should get there and the way I think might be totally different. And we can have that conversation. Like, we have the tools that we need to dialogue, whatever the outcome or the cause may be. So thank you for doing the work that you do. We need it. Some of the challenges that you faced, and one thing that came to mind when you were talking just about what you've studied and the work that you've done, is how was the transition from kind of political science to more of like science education for you? And are there other challenges that you can think of that you've faced along the way as you've pursued this career?
I would say that the transition was not a difficult one, just because political science equipped me so well to deal with the policy pieces. And really, that's what I worked for so long with public health doing that. And I did a lot of research through public health, which kind of got me trained for the scientific aspects of the nursing education. So that actually feels like it was pretty good preparation for the things that came. My master's in public health, had a lot of strong policy elements in it. So I would say a big challenge, which I would encourage anybody to reach out to me if they're struggling with this, would have been more like what my age was going to be when I, got into this career. And I know 40 doesn't seem that old, but it's certainly going back to school in my 30s to get a second undergraduate degree just felt, well, I say that with privilege, right? Like, I'm glad I could do it. And it also felt like a mountain to climb, with kids at home and just feeling like, oh my gosh, am I too old to do this? I have a decent career, I'm doing okay. And, just feeling like it was that creaky brain, aging brain, tired brain, trying to get back into the game and feel like I could, take on a new role in my late 30s. That was really a mental challenge for me, besides the logistics of just the older you get and you have if you have kids and things like that,
living, right?
your life gets more complicated. So
Yeah.
But I would say that's definitely a challenge I faced. And then, there's definitely I transitioned from social justice worlds where there was a lot of intentional work around things like racial justice and sustainable energy and social justice into the healthcare field, which doesn't have that same lens all the time. So changing environments was very challenging for me because I'm passionate about issues around justice. And so I don't know how else to describe it, as a big transition out of that world and into a world that's perhaps more representative of everyday life. I don't know.
Do you feel like it's gotten more integrated? Like, is social justice a more salient topic even in the years that you've been in the field?
It's a good question. I would say the current company I work for definitely has an intentional lens here in Pennsylvania. Like, there's definitely an effort to address internal systemic racism and to make, public statements about issues of justice. I know that they're doing some things that are anti-payday lending. They're offering some low rate pay forwards. I mean, they do some interesting things, so I like that. But I can't speak to me seeing that much evolution where I worked before, but I'd have a hard time. I was a nurse for about 4 years, so I'd have a hard time. I'd have to reflect on that more, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But it definitely feels like it's a more focused lens here in my new job and in my new role.
Very good. So I asked Alexandra this question before, and I'll pose it to you again now, about words of advice you would give to Shep alums who are thinking about pursuing a career either in nursing or midwifery or both.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think Shepherd alumni who pursue a career in medicine, particularly if they're going to become doctors, it's a great thing to do this type of internship. I mean, I ended up running the career program for Frontier as a piece of what I did after I left. So that's kind of another interesting piece to my story. But I saw the product of the internship on the students who I was helping to guide through the summer internship program, and a lot of them did become doctors. So I know that's an opportunity at W&L to be a pre-med student. And certainly I would say that being in the Shepherd program is a positive influence on your later practice of medicine. Some of the lessons that you'll learn from doing this type of internship will have a positive impact on you later. I would certainly encourage anybody who felt like they had the economic wherewithal and the time to get a public health degree alongside of a traditional health degree. I think it really expands our sense of what we do and why we do it, and gives you a lot of experience outside the hospital. Certainly in nursing, as Alexandra said, it's a very flexible field. So while I took a traditional track and did hospital nursing into a nurse practitioner, you don't have to do that. If you're interested in nursing, the sky is wide open. You can do public health nursing. You can do things outside the hospital, inside the hospital, in home settings, in community organizations. So it's a very flexible field. And at the time I was there, I don't know if it's any different. There is no sort of nursing track at W&L. So certainly other schools in the Shepherd program, there are nursing tracks. So I definitely encourage people to give nursing a serious thought if they're looking for something that pays good income, has good work-life balance, and is a very flexible job. And then to think about, incorporating public health in some way in the field, and perhaps even seeking a master's in public health. I think those are a couple of things. And then I don't know that I have anything else right off the bat. It's just, I think just the piece about encouraging anybody who comes out of school and, gets into a field and works for some years in their 20s, it's okay to go back to school. That both of us on this call, I find that interesting that we're both, we both went back to school to find something. And I feel like it was a natural kind of evolution for me. I did what I did. I don't regret anything I did in my 20s and my early 30s, and it evolved into this, and I'm happy where I'm at. So definitely that's a great thing to overcome any fears around that.
All right, here's my last formal question, and then we'll, open it up in case there's anything else you want to share. The question is, what brings you joy or fills up your cup? How do you replenish your spirit?
Yeah, it's a good question, because healthcare can feel very draining at times, for sure. I often think of, I don't know if you're familiar with the image of a sand mandala. Do you know what that is?
Mm-hmm.
So often I think about sometimes these long experiences where I'm with patients, and it feels like we worked and we worked and we worked, and then, we came out with an outcome that nobody wanted, whether it was a C-section or something. And I often just think of it as a sand mandala. It doesn't mean the work was any less beautiful or the process wasn't intentional. It just, sometimes it just, everything gets blown away at the end and you have to let it go. So I think conscious surrendering is a really important piece of the work, just really letting things go. And for me, replenishment looks like walks in nature, a lot of time outside, where I can feel like I can sort of let things go. And also making sure that I'm spending time with my friends and laughing, is really important.
Yeah.
Being lighthearted. I try to laugh with patients as much as I can, because we all need more laughter. And then I practice a lot of yoga. And for me, that's a really grounding experience. And some days that's like getting on my mat and doing the bare minimum and laying down and, resting. And sometimes it's more invigorating, but it just kind of depends on where my energy level is. Because of course, as a midwife, we work a lot of nights and we're up a lot of nights. And so we both need physical, refilling, and also sort of the spiritual, mental, emotional refilling. And so I'm still working with it. I don't, it's a practice to try to figure that out. And then my family can fill me up. Sometimes it's draining to go home to kids and, all the things at home, but sometimes it's fantastic. And then, of course, as I said earlier, what I find the most rewarding about my job fills me up, interactions with patients that feel like you really had some success, you built some trust, you opened a door for someone, you had a conversation no one had had with them before, they were able to hear you, the process they felt empowered by. So those things don't happen all the time, but certainly when they do, they're very rewarding.
Can I ask a final question about setting boundaries? Like
Yeah,
how,
great
especially
topic.
because of what you were saying, like with the nights, and I'm just thinking like,
Yeah.
what do boundaries look like for you in this work?
It's pretty tough. And I would say that I'm on the really, really good, lucky end of midwifery, where I feel like I've got a really good schedule. I work, on average between 40 and 45 hours a week, sometimes 50, but that's pretty good for midwifery. There's definitely midwives out there working more like 60 and 70 hours. So that is a work in progress. and I will try to be as specific as possible. So boundaries look like putting my phone in a basket when I come home off of call, because I do long stretches of call, and my phone doesn't get touched or it goes on silent, so that all the things that could distract me related to the phone aren't there when I'm around my kids. It looks like when I have to check results, because we have results baskets that are always filling up with results, lab results, things that have to be followed up on, that I structure my time as much as I can and say, okay, for my, 30 minutes in the evening or whatever, I'm going to do this then and not let it kind of fill the day. I definitely do try to do patient follow-ups, like when someone's had a loss or there's something else going on, but I try to make those happen on my work days instead of on my personal days so that I can keep those boundaries. And I encourage people to reach out to me through my inbox, my email, instead of a phone, so that they can be there for me when I'm ready to work on them, but they're not there all the time. But I live in a small town, and so I'm learning, what midwifery looks like in a small town. And, Friday night, my neighbor was due to go into labor, and I knew she was our patient, and I was just so nervous about being her midwife, and they wanted me to be their midwife, but I was like, oh, I didn't tell them, but I was like, oh, I feel so nervous about it, and
Yeah.
I ended up being the one on call, and I had told all my midwife colleagues, I was so nervous. They said, you're going to do it. But of course they had said, if you need support, let us know. But I ended up being there, and it was like, great. It was great. And everything was great, but I was worried about that. So
Yeah.
those things I'm still sort of learning. I'm going to have to be there for a lot of people that know me, or that I know them, or even that consider me friends. And that's something I would say I'm walking into, that I don't have all the answers about, for sure. And it's a work in progress. But I am aware a lot too, that when I'm in the community, that, I protect HIPAA, of course, but just that what I say at any point about my job or whatever, it's a small town. I learned that in Eastern Kentucky. I would always tell the couriers, you leave, but we stay, right? So what you do is a reflection on Frontier, and try to impress upon them the importance of that we are the reason they have this opportunity, and that their behavior reflects on our program. And it's a small town, and people, lost opportunities and internships for us, and people also gained them because of their behavior or commitment. So I feel that way, and I'm aware of that, the politics of that, as I'm out in the community in other roles. And I think
And
that's
it kind of
important
makes
for
me
people
think,
who are, for people who want to go into rural healthcare, which is, there's such a
yes,
great need. That's just a really important piece of the work.
yes. And kind of who better, right? Like, who better than your neighbor or someone you know or someone you see at church or at Rotary or anywhere else? Who better than them to care for you in a moment of need in your life, or in a health crisis, or in a scare or something? Like, I think that sometimes, you know, we may value the anonymity or the separation between work and our lives, and I can appreciate that. But I also know from my own experiences abroad, and now like practicing social work in a smaller community, like, we're all connected, and the fabric is so thick and rich in places where people do see each other frequently and they know what each other does. I admire the courage that that requires, because the outcome and the experiences may not always be ideal.
Yeah, I mean, we're in an environment where we certainly are all connected, but we don't always share the same cultural fabrics. So I think that's
Hmm.
where it gets really tricky, right? That we all make assumptions about one another that may or may not be true. We're in this sort of grand experiment in this country where,
Yes,
a lot of social rules that are true for subsets are not true for others. And so that there's always things I don't know about the encounter. There's so much I don't know. And
that's
so
true.
that's where I think it's hard, because if I felt like every person who knew me and who I knew, we joined in it together and we said, okay, we're both on this journey, and I know that you're not in charge and I'm not in charge, and we're both doing our best. But you're just not certain everybody shares that mind frame. So anyways, just always challenging ourselves to do what we can do, and to practice evidence-based medicine, and to have the
Right.
intentions in the right place, and then the rest, you can't control.
That's right. We just keep trying to build community. one encounter at a time to have some kind of shared experience.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate all of this that you've shared and so much passion, obviously, that you channel into your work every day. I know your community's a better place because of people like you who are out there doing the work
I
wherever,
hope so. I hope
whenever.
so. I hope so. I hope so. We have some great providers who work here. So, and I miss Kentucky. I do as well miss my family and friends there. So, but
Yeah,
thank you for the opportunity, and I hope it's helpful to somebody. And feel free to pass along my contact if anybody has questions.
outstanding. I will do that. Well, thank you again, Nancy, for being here with us. And thank you, Alexandra, for your contributions as well. We'll see you next time for another edition of Shep's Professional Insights. Thank you and have a great night.